Story 1. The House of Nightmares. Our first ascent takes us back to 1965, to a modest house in Indianapolis, Indiana. This is the story of Sylvia Likens, a 16-year-old girl whose life became a nightmare inside the basement of Gertrude Banaszewski. Sylvia and her sister Jenny were left in the care of Gertrude, a mother of 7 who agreed to board the girl for $20 a week while their parents traveled for carnival work. At first, the arrangement seemed standard, but Gertrude Banaszewski was not a stable woman. She was sickly, depressed, and harbored a deep, simmering rage against the world, a rage she would soon focus entirely on Sylvia. It started slowly, beatings for minor infractions, accusations of stealing, but the abuse escalated with terrifying speed. Gertrude didn't just abuse Sylvia herself. She weaponized her own children and the neighborhood kids. She convinced them that Sylvia was bad, that she was a liar, and that she deserved punishment. The house became a cult of cruelty, and the epicenter of this cult was the basement. As the abuse worsened, Sylvia was banished to the cellar. This was a finished basement with carpet and heating. It was a cold, concrete dungeon. Sylvia was forced to sleep on a filthy mattress, often naked, starved, and dehydrated. The basement became her entire world. It was where the neighborhood boys were invited down to taunt and beat her. It was where Gertrude, in a fit of sadistic madness, burned her with cigarettes and scalded her with boiling water. The isolation of that basement is what makes this story so harrowing. Upstairs, life went on. The television played, meals were cooked, and neighbors walked by on the sidewalk, completely unaware that just a few feet below ground level, a teenager was being systematically destroyed. The torture reached a fever pitch when Gertrude and the children carved the words, "I am a prostitute and proud of it," into Sylvia's stomach. They forced her to write a letter claiming she was running away, a desperate attempt by Gertrude to cover her tracks. But Sylvia couldn't run. She was trapped in that dark, concrete box. In late October, Sylvia tried to escape. She heard the sound of a church choir nearby and tried to scream, to bang on the basement walls, praying anyone would hear her. But the thick foundation stifled her cries. Gertrude punished this attempt with even more severity. On October 26, 1965, the suffering finally ended. After a final beating and being forced into a scalding bath, Sylvia Likens passed away on a mattress on the floor. When police arrived, they found the house in disarray and Sylvia's body bearing the map of her torture. The basement, with its cold floor and single light bulb, stood as a silent witness to the worst of human nature. This case reminds us that sometimes the basement isn't scary because of ghosts, but because of what people are capable of doing when they think no one is watching. Story 2. The Silent Watcher. We move now from the horrors of humanity to the inexplicable terrors of the supernatural. This next account comes from a family in New Jersey who experienced a haunting that was centered entirely around their basement, a haunting that culminated in physical violence. The family lived in an older home, the kind with creaky floorboards and a history that no one quite remembered. For years, the basement was just a utility space. Laundry, storage, the usual. But slowly, the atmosphere began to shift. It started with a feeling of being watched. You know that sensation. The prickling on the back of your neck when you're folding laundry. The sudden urge to run up the stairs as soon as you turn off the light. Then, the sightings began. It wasn't a wispy, transparent ghost. Multiple family members on separate occasions reported seeing a solid male figure. He was described as tall, wearing dark clothing, standing perfectly still. His favorite spots were the foot of the main basement stairs and the dark recess near the back cellar door. He never spoke. He never moved while they were looking. He just stood there, staring up at the light of the kitchen, like a predator waiting for permission to ascend. The father of the family, a skeptic by nature, tried to dismiss it. He checked for drafts, for light leaks, for anything logical. But even he began to dread going down there to check the fuse box. The air in the basement was always 10 degrees colder than the rest of the house, heavy with a static charge that made your hair stand on end. The activity remained passive, watching, waiting, until the father's girlfriend came to visit. She was skeptical of the ghost stories, laughing them off as a family trying to scare her. One evening, she needed to grab something from the storage area. She opened the basement door and started down the wooden steps. She was about halfway down when she stopped. She later said the air suddenly felt thick, like walking into water. She looked down into the gloom, and although she didn't see the figure, she felt an overwhelming sense of malice. She turned to go back up, gripping the handrail. That is when it happened. According to her account, she didn't trip, she didn't slip. She felt two distinct, cold hands pressed firmly against the middle of her back, and then a violent shove. She was launched forward, tumbling down the remaining stairs and crashing onto the concrete floor below. The family heard the scream and the thud. They rushed down to find her bruised and terrified, huddled in the corner, pointing at the empty stairs. There was no one else in the basement. The only way out was past the family at the top of the stairs. Whatever had been standing in the corner, watching them for years, had finally decided to make contact. They moved out shortly after, leaving the silent watcher alone in the dark once again. Story 3. The Intruder in the Crawl Space. Ghosts are frightening because they are unknown, but there's a specific genre of fear that is far more tangible: the fear of home invasion. Our third story is a Frogger case, a term used for people who secretly live in other people's homes. This case involves a family who, much like our previous story, believed they were being haunted. It started with noises at night. The family would be in bed, and they would hear the distinct sound of footsteps on the floorboards below. Soft, rhythmic creaking. When the father would go down with a baseball bat to investigate, the house would be silent. The doors were locked. The windows were secured. Then, things started going missing. It was subtle at first. A loaf of bread would disappear from the pantry. A carton of milk would be empty when they were sure it was full the day before. They blamed each other. The husband blamed the kids. The wife blamed the husband. It created tension in the home, a feeling of gaslighting that permeated their daily lives. One night, the noises were different. It wasn't just footsteps. It was a cough, a dry, suppressed cough coming from the lowest level of the house. The father decided he had enough. He didn't just check the rooms this time. He went into the basement. He checked the laundry room, the furnace room, and finally, he approached the small, waist-high door that led to the dirt crawl space under the kitchen. The door, which was usually painted shut or latched, was slightly ajar. Heart pounding, armed with a flashlight and a bat, he pulled the door open and shone the beam into the darkness. What he saw was not a ghost, and it wasn't a raccoon. It was a makeshift campsite. There, nestled in the dirt between the floor joists, was a sleeping bag. There were empty food wrappers, the very same food that had gone missing from their kitchen. There were bottles of urine, and there was a man, a stranger, ragged and dirty, scrambled backward into the shadows of the crawl space like a spider. The father slammed the door, wedged a chair against it, and called the police. When the authorities arrived and dragged the man out, they found something that turned this from a creepy anecdote into a near-death experience. Among the intruder's bedding, they found a large, serrated kitchen knife. This man had been living beneath them for weeks. He had listened to their conversations. He knew their schedules. He had walked through their kitchen while they slept upstairs. And every night, he retreated to the basement, clutching that knife, just waiting for the moment he might be discovered. The family realized that the ghost they feared was actually a man who could have ended their lives at any moment. They never looked at their basement the same way again. Story 4, the Philadelphia Dungeon. For our final and perhaps most disturbing story, we travel to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. This case, exposed in 2011, reveals a level of depravity that rivals a horror movie script. This is a case of Linda Weston and the Boiler Room Captives. In October 2011, a landlord was inspecting a darker, forgotten section of an apartment building's basement, specifically the sub-basement boiler room. It was a space not meant for human habitation. It was damp, dark, and filled with the mechanical hum of the building's infrastructure. But as he shone his flashlight into the gloom, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Chained to the boiler pipes, huddled in the filth, were 4 adults. These individuals were malnourished, terrified, and living in their own waste. They were intellectually disabled adults whom Linda Weston had lured into her care. But Weston wasn't a caregiver. She was a predator. Weston had been operating a multi-state fraud scheme for years. She would target vulnerable people, often estranged from their families or within the foster care system, and offer them a home. Once she had them, she would seize their identification documents and Social Security benefits. To keep the money flowing, she had to keep the victims alive, but she had no interest in treating them like human beings. The basement was their prison. They were kept in the dark for days on end. If they complained or tried to escape, they were beaten with bats, hammers, and pistol whipped. They were fed a starvation diet, sometimes forced to eat their own waste to survive. What makes the Linda Weston case so terrifying is the logistical coldness of it. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a business. She moved these victims from Texas to Virginia to Florida, and finally to Philadelphia, always keeping them one step ahead of the authorities, always keeping them in the dark. The basement in Philadelphia was just the final stop. When police rescued them, the victims were weak and confused. One of them was found chained by the ankle to the boiler. The space was so small, they couldn't even stand up straight. Linda Weston was eventually sentenced to life in prison plus 80 years. But for the victims, the trauma of the basement, the darkness, the chains, the hunger, is a life sentence of its own. It serves as a grim reminder that in a busy city, surrounded by thousands of people, you can vanish into a cellar and be forgotten by the world above. We often joke about running up the basement stairs to escape the imaginary demons nipping at our heels. But as we've seen today, the basement is a place where the rules of the upper world don't apply. It is a place of concealment. Whether it is the tragic torture Sylvia likens, the supernatural violence in New Jersey, the hidden intruder waited with a knife, or the dungeon of Linda Weston, these stories prove that the underground is where our safety ends. Which of these stories unsettled you the most? Was it the supernatural force you can't fight, or the human monsters who can lock the door behind you? Let me know in the comments below. If you want to sleep with the lights on tonight, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more dives into the dark. And remember, next time you hear a noise in your basement, maybe just leave the door locked. Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.